Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the ninth Anon Audio Chat on the AudioCast series channel of the Q News Patriot. I'm the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Coming back to you again towards the end of July, 1st of August here in 2023 with Dr. Kirk Elliott. As we look at the progression of events happening around the world, as we look at the shifting balances of geopolitical power, influence, sway, the ability to buy favor, the ability to manipulate other parties or not into your way of thinking. We're watching a lot of that systematically either altered or completely removed or destroyed. Dr. Elliott has a long history in finance and sort of understanding how the game has been played for a long time. He has a keen interest in precious metals and other commodities that hold, quote, real value. And we can come out and say that on this broadcast today because we have an actual financial advisor rather than myself, who is not a financial advisor. So without further ado, we're going to talk a lot today about de-dollarization and the economic implications of what's happening here in the West. But as far as an intro is concerned, Dr. Elliott, welcome back. Thank you for joining me yet again.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, SG. It's really great to be back. A lot going on, like you said. I mean, it's some of the wildest times I have ever seen economically. I've been doing this for 29 years, right? But this is getting to be very interesting, kind of paradigm shifting moments, like the pivot. We're seeing a pivot globally, and it's happening right underneath our nose.
Do you think that pivot is occurring primarily at the behest of, or the sort of the command and control of Russia and China and this emerging multipolar order? Or do you think the pivot is being caused more by what we'll just say decay and incompetence over here in the SWIFT system?
I think it's the former. I think that every when you have a reserve currency, which is basically the currency that all international settlements are traded in globally, none of them have ever stood the test of time, right? You go back in history, ours became the world's reserve currency in 1944 with the Bretton Woods Act. Prior to that, the British sterling pound was the world's reserve currency. It lasted about 110 years. Prior to that, it was like the Portuguese currency, the Spanish currency, the Dutch currency. I mean, you go way back in time. The average is about 80-something years, with the low 45, the high about 110. So 44 until now, we're 80-something years into this experiment. Well, why do reserve currencies fail, right? Well, because to be the world's reserve currency, you have to print more money than what you need domestically, because all international settlements are traded in your currency. Well, in time, people forget. Countries forget. People forget. It's like, wait a second, America, you're printing all these dollars, you're flooding the markets with it, and you've squandered your time in the sun, you're creating inflation. And if I were a policymaker in America, I'd say, wait a second, we have to print more than what we need domestically because we're the reserve currency. Every single country around the world needs it, right? But that's not a good answer, because ultimately they're always going to fail. They'll go to something new, something that hasn't amassed all that debt. And, the global population just wants change, right? And so this is where we are, right? It's just a function of time and the massive amount of debt that's been established. Because in 1776, when we started our nation, we had zero debt. We didn't have time to spend like drunken sailors, right? We were just babies. But now, 250 plus years later, we're $32 trillion worth of debt. It took 250 plus years from 1776 until now to actually get to that point, 32 trillion, right? But what happened in June of this year? In June, the numbers just came out. We added to the deficit $690 billion. 690 billion times 12, if you were to annualize that, we're on pace for adding $8 trillion to our national debt in a 12-month span. That we realize $8 trillion in 1 year, when it took 250 years to get to 32 trillion, we're out of control spending, right? Which means we've probably hit our twilight. We're about done. Some other country's going to take over. Which country? I don't think it's going to be a country this time. I think the pivot is a regional currency. It's a global currency. It's the central bank digital currency system, probably being spearheaded by the BRICS nations, because they are doing everything in their power to dismantle the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. For example, they're meeting on August 22nd in Durban, South Africa, to make this announcement. They're inviting 20 to 30 heads of state to this meeting. And what are they going to talk about? Well, we don't have to really speculate. The Russian embassy spilled the beans, right? In an official post, they said, this was about 3 weeks ago, said, we're excited for the BRICS, collective currency that's going to be backed by gold. It's like, okay, they said it. I mean, they just flat out said it. So this makes sense as to why they would have this meeting in Durban, South Africa, rather than in one of the two big countries of the BRICS nations, Russia or China, and in one of their crown jewel cities, Shanghai or Moscow, right? They're having it in the smallest BRICS nation of them all, South Africa, and not even one of their big cities, Johannesburg or Cape Town. They're having it in Durban. Why? So South Africa is the largest gold mining country in the world, and Durban is very close to one of the world's largest gold mines, which is right outside of Johannesburg, right? So very symbolic to me, SG, that you would have this meeting announcing a collective currency that's going to be backed by gold in South Africa. So the BRICS nations are pushing out the US dollar by saying, look, our central bank digital currency that we're going to have is going to be backed by gold. It's that carrot, right? It's like, why would you want some other country's CBDC when you can use ours and it's backed by gold, right? So, but there's more to just making that announcement, backing your central bank digital currency with gold than meets the eye. So on August 1st, Russia, Putin just signed into law 2 days ago, their central bank digital currency bill for the digital ruble. Well, it's not down the road. It's August 1st, it becomes effective. It's like, okay, it's just a few days away, right? And then you look at that and you look what the IMF did last week. So just last week, the International Monetary Fund made a ruling that said, if you're a country and you're paying off debt to another country, you don't have to pay for it in US dollars anymore, right? Which was what the world's reserve currency status was. You can now pay for it using renminbi. It's like, what? Renminbi? Why would a country pay off another country's debts with renminbi, which is the internal Chinese currency? So China has two currencies, right? They have the yuan, which is used for all international settlements, and you have the renminbi. If you're a Chinese citizen, you're going to the grocery store in China or the gas station, you're using renminbi. So they're saying, get rid of the US dollar, use their internally traded currency. Why? Well, they're doing everything they can do to build up the countries of the BRICS nations to dismantle the longtime favor of the world's reserve currency that the US dollar has had.
This is amazing. This, as you're going through this process and as you're describing the things that are happening at the geopolitical level, these are things that we're publicly seeing happen on full display, right? This has nothing to do with sort of an espionage covert war. These are things that are happening outright out in the open. And it very clearly shows some sort of restabilization or rebalancing of what is an overbalanced system, right? If we look at trade over the last 100 years and the way that the US dollar has been used at the nation state level, primarily to the ignorance of most of us, we the people here in the USA that were actually making the dollars, right? Generating the wealth, pulling our weight and generating the productivity within the system. It's almost as though we are, we're taking some of our, what you would consider maybe historic competition. I hate the word nemesis, but countries in the last 20th century, 100 years or so, that have sort of aligned themselves as counterbalancing entities to the United States, this corporate government, right, that none of us knew existed, but exists under the Act of 1871. And it's those very players that are providing the channels and the conduits and the security more than anything else to these other nation states around the world, where they're outlining infrastructure, they're rolling out digital currency, just like you talked about with Russia. They're building out interblock, alliances and trading posts. And I use the term posts more as like a worldwide checkpoint kind of thing. They're going through a process of building out a system to exist with one another and without the need of the American dollar, right? Without the need of the U.S. economy. The U.S. economy has been the supergiant behemoth that has sort of dominated world trade and world balance of power and balance of influence in the last 150 years or so, and we're seeing that balance restored. What are your thoughts on the Russian moves economically around the world, specifically with the African nations, to help disconnect them from reliance on the West?
Well, Putin's certainly looking for allies. I mean, that's all I can say. When he's basically bribing, at minimum 6 African nations with free grain from Russia to join with him, right? It's like, okay, what you're basically what's the best way to get somebody's heart through with food, right? You're gonna feed their bellies. Well, this is what he's doing. It's like, hey, we've got this coalition, we want to join you. Africa is rich with natural resources, right? A lot of oil, a lot of gold there, right? And those African nations, but Putin's looking for allies. And so what he's doing with some of these St. Petersburg summits, in June and July with the African nations. I mean, he's looking for allies of the forgotten continent, right? And so, I believe he's going to get them. They're in closer proximity, right? They're already South Africa's already part of the BRICS nations. It just makes sense that they would join that political, economic, military union that the BRICS nations brings to the table. And so a lot of people, they want to join a winning team, right? And they look at the BRICS nations that are coming up. It's like, man, this really is a winning team. Look, it's about 70+% of the total world's population in this trading block. We want to be a part of that. We want to trade with China. We want to trade with Middle East for oil. We want to trade with Russia. We don't want their militaries on our back, right? Because they don't fight fair, right? So this is where they're using that clout and that collective bargaining, so to speak, to generate more allies in the African nations.
Do you see these moves as effective in any way at reducing the influence and the power of the Federal Reserve Treasury bonds around the rest of the world? In other words, this de-dollarization, right? The extraction from that particular system altogether. Are these preparatory moves for something along those lines?
Well, I think it's adding to moves that they've already made, SG. So yeah, the answer is yes. But see, when Biden actually decided to use this nuclear option of taking Russia out of the SWIFT system, he did that back when it was early on in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because he wanted to really stick it to Russia and to Putin and say, you know what, you're going to fight against Ukraine. We're going to make it impossible for you to receive bank wires and to actually fund your nation. So it backfired, because what did Russia do? Well, they just went to China and said, hey, we got kicked out of the SWIFT system. What do you got? And they said, well, we have something called SIPs. It's a similar thing, but it's part of the BRICS nations. So what Biden did is he created even a more stronger tie between Russia and China by doing this, when that's all that they had to do, just work together, because they already have a SWIFT replacement. But now even that's changing with the emergence of central bank digital currencies. So I think this is I want to go through a quick timeline, if I may, of the central bank digital currency system and where we are, and why even that statement that you just made actually fits into this timeline almost perfectly, right? Because you go back to 2,000 years ago, God wrote in Revelation, through the John the Revelator. It's like Revelation 13:16. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell, key words, unless they had the mark. So a couple thousand years ago, this whole concept was actually introduced, right, for such a time as this. Now, fast forward to August 9th of 2019. The Federal Reserve docket OP 1670 was actually then put into the Federal Register in 2020. But we can see what they were working on. This is the introduction of the FedNow app. The FedNow app is the conduit from you and your money, the tunnel from you through your phone to the central bank digital currency repository, the debit and credit system, right? So in this docket, they introduced the FedNow app, 365 days a year, 24/7 instant money transfer. That's what they're proposing, is this is going to be great for banks. But what's more sinister about it is they start defining money in this docket. They say it's a means of exchange, it's got a hold of value. That's what money is, right? You've got a $5 bill, $10 bill, $20 bill. It's a unit of money, a hold of value that you exchange back and forth to buy things with. That's what money is. But they added another function of money in this statement. They said it's a means of social control. It's like, what? I mean, people can just go to the Federal Reserve and look up OP 1670, and you'll see this right on their website. It's like, when is money a means of social control? Oh, SG, it's when they control the purse strings, cut you off from buying or selling if they don't like you. Well, that's not just a statement that I make just willy-nilly either. You go to March 9th of 2022, Executive Order 14067, Biden signed into law, central bank digital currency could actually be a thing in America. Fast forward March 29th, 2022, Dr. Pippa Malmgren at the World Government Summit in Abu Dhabi coined the concept, or said it for the first time, programmable money. So programmable money means we can cut you off from buying or selling if your digital social profile, your ESG, your social credit score doesn't add up to what we want it to be. We'll cut you off from your money. Now, September 12th of 22, UN Resolution A/RES/76/307. What does that say? It basically gave a timeline for, they want a global digital ID that's biometric to you and tied to your bank accounts by September of 2024. Okay, so they said that in September 12th. They gave themselves 2 years to get this done because their deadline is September 15th of 2024. They gave themselves 2 years and 3 days to get that done. March 6th of 2023, Bank for International Settlements Project Icebreaker. This goes back to Russia being kind of getting the boot from the SWIFT system. So Project Icebreaker, if you go to the Bank for International Settlements website, it describes it. This is a mechanism where they can stop bank wires from happening from bank to bank if the use of funds doesn't match up with their ideology. Okay, there they say it. Social control, as it was originally created, now ideology is brought into the picture. May 31st of 2023, Bank for International Settlements Project Aurora, which is real-time transaction monitoring of every person in any company in any bank in any country. SG, that's like everybody that has a bank account. Then June 20th of 2023, the blueprint for the future monetary system, improving the old, enabling the new, was a report issued by the Bank for International Settlements where they came up with a concept called the unified ledger. So the unified ledger in the digital world, Bitcoin has a unified ledger, right? It's basically you collect all of your financial data, your real estate, stock accounts, brokerage accounts, checking accounts, savings accounts, and you put it into a packet, right? So, but in decentralized cryptocurrency, blockchain, they don't know the source of the funds. They don't know the use of the funds. They don't know the owner. It's all encrypted, right? It's very private. The opposite is true under central bank digital currency. Under CBDC, they control the data. They know the source of funds. They know the use of funds, and they know who the owner is. Now, the difference between a Bitcoin version of a tokenized process is decentralized cryptocurrency tokenization is immutable and non-programmable, meaning you can't change it ever. It is what it is. Under this system, the ownership can be changed based on what? your ideology under Project Icebreaker, your digital social profile under the World Economic Forum directives, right? So this unified ledger is scary. You basically give up your ownership of all assets to the government, right? So this is also this is probably why they say you will own nothing and you're going to like it, right? And it's like, okay, this is crazy. Now, June 27th through 29th of 2023, not too long ago. This is all happening really fast. So let's see, who was the professor? Eswar Prasad. He's a Cornell University professor at the annual meeting of new champions in Tianjin, China, basically started bragging about programmable money and how awesome it would be. Imagine a world where drug sales could be eliminated because you could turn off the ability for them to do that with programmable money, or pornography, or ammunition sales. It's like, what? They just put ammunition sales in the same category as drugs and pornography. That exposes their ideology, doesn't it? Right? So then fast forward to, let's see, around the same time frame, but this meeting was held in March, a little bit back, but the UN Secretary General said this, and I quote, "I propose that the General Assembly provide the Secretary General and the United Nations systems with a standing authority to convene and operationalize automatically an emergency platform in the event of a future complex global shock of sufficient scale, severity, and reach." So what is a complex global shock? They explain it in the next paragraph, so we don't have to speculate. It's, let's see, emergency authority is given because of a major climatic event, a future pandemic risk, a global digital connectivity disruption, or major event in outer space, or any unforeseen risk. Well, who does this apply to? The stakeholders of the world, which they then explain in the next sentence, who are academics, governments, private sector actors, and international financial institutions. Okay. So how long is this going to last? Well, they basically say, not basically, they actually do, that this emergency directive, this emergency authority that's granted to them is finite in lifespan unless they see fit to do so. They can extend it indefinitely. Oh, right. So they saying that they can have emergency powers and control for the rest of time if they want to. Then we go back, so that's everything up to date, right? But then you go back to that UN resolution that talked about September 15th of 2024, the global biometric ID tied to all bank accounts, all right before, 1 week before September 22nd, where they say the UN pact for the future. They already have the conference date set. They want to expose to the whole world everything that they've been working on with the new biometric ID cards tied to your bank accounts so they can cut you off from buying or selling. This is their timeline, right? Now, we've had some major developments over the last week, just over the last week. So Nigel Farage, which is the leader of Brexit, right? What happened to him? Well, he has a bank account at a bank called Coutts, C-O-U-T-T-S. It's one of the 8th oldest banks in the world, and all of Europe, actually. Very upper echelon, thumb your nose in the air, very snooty upper level. You have to be wealthy to have an account there. They cut him off from his bank account because of his conservative political views. So in a 40-page dossier that they wrote to Mr. Farage, they said, you know what? We're cutting you off of your bank account because, and in this document, they mentioned the word Brexit over 80 times. They mentioned the word Russia over 140 times. They also mentioned, because of his support for Trump, because of his views on net zero carbon emissions, and because of his views on vaccines. It's like, what? He got cut off from his bank accounts because of that? Totally because of ideology? Shouldn't be a shock to anybody, because Project Icebreaker told us that they were going to do that. So did the World Economic Forum and their meeting at the World Government Forum. So they cut him off. Who else got cut off? Kanye West. It's like, Kanye West, right? The a musician. Yep. I don't know what he said, but he got cut off from his bank account. But the big one that happened yesterday was Dr. Merkel, the health nutrition doctor. He got cut off from JP Morgan Chase, closed his bank accounts and his CFO's bank accounts and his CEO's bank accounts and their spouses and their kids without due cause, without a reason why. They just said that they're cutting you off because he believes in natural medicine, probably against vaccines. It's like, give me a break, right? So the assault is on for people who have different ideologies than what these globalists have. They're starting to separate them from their money. We should not be surprised because they've telegraphed this. They've talked about this for a couple of years with all of these statements and documents that we've just gone over. They said they're going to do it, and now they're starting to do it, SG.
Wow. What an incredible timeline. And that really sort of paints for everyone out there, and especially if you're listening to this broadcast and you consider yourself more middle of the road or maybe more of an independent, and I'd rather just, keep my politics to myself, except on voting day. It is worth appreciating that's a wonderful point of view, and that's a wonderful ideological walk to follow. I'm sure it's very peaceful, but it is important to realize that these are the things that are happening in our world right now. We're up against something called Agenda 2030, formerly Agenda 2020, later became Agenda 21, and then fast forward to Agenda 2030 when Trump interrupted this plan, right? This has been a very large, long plan of a deep state mafia that's been in power and control in the world for a long time. They've always had the power and the money. They've never needed more. This is about a power trip. This is about trying to be God himself, right? They believe themselves, whether for good or for ill, to be the inheritors of this world because their deity was cast out of heaven. So as we consider what this process is all about, right? When we consider the forces that we're actually truly up against, when we consider that, while we may have some back and forth and some good versus evil and some very good evidence to show that there is some sort of interference happening at the national nation state level, we could cite cybersecurity concerns and infiltrations and attacks. We could cite all sorts of hacker groups that are going off all around the world, disrupting major agencies, a lot of them financial, right? But we're watching what amounts to a rebalancing, I think almost a deconstruction of the old system, and something new is emerging. And it's really up to we, the people, having these types of broadcasts and discussing what their plan is. It's up to us to build out the alternative, right? It's not going to come like a thief in the night, if we will, right? It's not going to just magically be here. There is going to be a build out process that has to happen. It's already underway. We're witnessing things like the 2018 Quantum Act taken into account at different state levels in the United States right here, right now, and a conversion of those processes at the digital level, right, to a higher, more secure based system of operation. But going through this process, this defunct U.S. corporate government is going to do and is doing everything within their power to carry out the whims of what they believe to be the puppet masters, right? The puppet masters would be those transnational financial institutions, those transnational investors, the Bilderberg Group, anyone with the last name Rothschild, some people, some very prominent billionaires, right, that are into medical research or worldwide shipping and supply. These are the sorts of interests that would benefit from the sorts of actions that we're discussing right here, right now, because we know that the government itself, the government apparatus, cannot publicly benefit from these actions here in the West. We're in an information age. A vast majority, it's well over 8 in 10 people, it's actually pushing 9 in 10 individuals within the United States are against any form of government control of their wallets, bank accounts, or more control over the money than they already have. A vast majority of Americans consider the government's involvement in money already to be too excessive, too overbearing, too centralized, too invasive. And so to do something like the processes that Dr. Elliott is talking about in the last 3 to 5 years time frame, it's almost stupid in a way, right? It sort of highlights out for everyone to see exactly who you are and what you're about, right? They've always been more calculated than this. So, Dr. Elliott, how far do you think the CBDCs get before some sort of population-based rejection of that means of exchange happens?
Well, I think it's already happening, and this is the hope in all of this, right? Because when they try to usurp too much control, you're going to have pushback, right? And I think that's what's happening. So on July 10th, India actually pulled out of their support for the CBDC BRICS currency. They're not out of the BRICS nations, but they are not going to support the BRICS common currency because the rupee is the strongest currency in the BRICS nations, and their GDP in India is growing faster than the other countries in the BRICS nation zone. So there's international unsupport of their system there. Now, here in America, we've got all kinds of states. So what I see here is kind of states' rights coming to the forefront again, just as the founding fathers envisioned, right? So you've got Texas that missed the legislative deadline, but that'll probably come up next time. A proposal for a state chartered bank backed by gold gets you out of that FedNow system. It gets you out of that FDIC system and out of the tentacles, so to speak, that they're reaching out with. Alaska doing the same thing. Ron DeSantis in Florida about 2 months ago said, we're not going to accept CBDCs in my state, right? Okay, so that's awesome. Now you've got about 8 other states, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Utah, Wyoming, some others that basically said gold is legal tender in our states, right? So you're seeing this grassroots support, this uptrending momentum pulling out of the reach of this federal system. So that's kind of in the works. That's percolating, not necessarily there right now. But what is right there right now? A way for you to actually get out of that system with something that's real, something that's tangible, something that's private. This is why you and I have talked about silver and gold, tangible assets. When you own them, you are basically not part of their digital system, right? It's a private transaction that nobody knows when you purchase it. You have to report it when you sell it, right, for taxes, but it's a private transaction while you own it, right? And if you have physical delivery of it, you could use silver for barter in a worst case scenario, or you could just take advantage of the amazing growth, right? Over the last week, silver's up like over 10%. Over the last 6 months, it's up over 45%. Over the last 3 years, it's up about 120% since March of 2020. I mean, this is amazing growth. But what we're also talking about is not just the growth. We're talking about a mechanism, a tool to protect your financial privacy and freedom moving forward. That's an amazing thing. And but when you couple that, which anybody can do right here, right now, plus the potential of call your state legislators, tell them we want a state chartered bank in our state, propose legislation for it, right? You're not going to get a call back if you call your U.S. representatives or senators, probably, but you would probably get a call back if you call your state legislators. They're much better at that, right? So they might not even realize that there's this problem brewing. But just last week, I don't know, maybe it wasn't even last week, it was like 4 or 5 days ago, the Federal Reserve came out with a list of 722 banks that have had an over 50% loss of their capital holdings. 50% in this last quarter. It's like, man, that's a huge loss, right? That these banks are now having to realize in an undercapitalized banking world. Now they're losing 50% of their capital, and there's 722 of them that have lost more than that. We're on the verge of a major bank failure, right? Or many bank failures. This all comes at a time of the year when there's always an October surprise, right? Where the stock market hits the skids, big correction. It happens just about every single year. They should just take the word surprise out of it and just call it October, right? Because it happens every year. It's no longer a surprise. But why is it? Well, the federal budget comes out in September, right? So then in October, people realize, oh my word, we have no money. Look at all this money we're spending and we're about to fall apart. And so they pull back the reins. And that's why I believe there's always a correction in October, because it's the end of the federal government fiscal year and the numbers come out, right? So we've got that happening. You've also got August 22nd, the BRICS nations meeting. There's a lot of pain, sadly, coming in the financial markets over the last quarter of this year. But you know what? I have a smile on my face because SG, I'm focused on the solution, not on the storm. All of us should be focused on the solution, not on the storm. If you're focused on the storm, yeah, you're going to frown. If you're focused on the solution, it's like, wow, this silver that I've got, it's going up a lot. This is amazing, right? This is for such a time as this. We invest like this, allocate like this to take advantage of these trends so those trends don't take advantage of us.
Well, it's worth highlighting, as we're going through and we're having this discussion about these financial events and these national security events and these geopolitical events, the convergence of the forces is sort of remarkable, right? It can't be coincidental, I think, in many respects. It is in some respect, it is designed. But it is also worth noting that in the time periods that have come in days past, where these same sorts of transitions and changes have occurred, there's been a couple of truths that I've been sort of researching throughout history, right? Sort of historical truisms, if you will. And one of those truisms is that there's always two sides in any sort of large national downturn event, whether that event occurs in the financial sector or whether that event occurs in the governmental or civilian sector and maybe affects commerce and things of these natures, right? 9/11, for instance, grounded all commerce that was in the skies above the nation for a number of weeks, right? And so when we consider that the duality at play has always been used by the controllers and the puppeteers for their benefit and to sort of further erode the holdings and the power that we, the people, have always possessed here in the world, I think in many respects, we're at a point now where the gloves have been taken off. There is some sort of runaway train, if you will, that's been created in the business and the Western world Bretton Woods system just in general. If you look at the rest of the world and how that process is kicking off in such a coordinated fashion, it's very much, I think, like Operation Sandman, right? Except on a slow boil, instead of an hour by hour event. So as we consider that they've always benefited before through these events, and now for the first time they stand exposed just as we do, can't we also use some of those tactics that they have used in the love and light intentionality, in the intentionality of doing right by the Spirit of God that lives within us, so that we can rebalance the world? I think it's important to look at what they have always done. They've always had what we would call superior knowledge. They've always shielded a lot of things from we the people. They've had control of information and educational institutions really for the last 700 years, with just a couple of notable exceptions, which were quickly squashed in relative municipalities, right? So Dr. Kirk, I guess in closing and moving this along, as we look at things like state chartered banks, a decentralization of finance, I think a state-based system that communicates with one another in an interstate commerce style fashion is very possible. I think in the United States I think that would be very easy to accomplish at that state level if we could get the lobbying, if we could get the ability to control those state legislatures, right, with outside interests removed or somehow dismantled. Or somehow blocked, right? We know that the infrastructure goes deep. Just look at what Kerry Lake is up against in Arizona, for example. But as we look at that system, do you believe that system will be capable of supporting, and this, I understand that this is just an opinion-based question, right? But I'm just curious what's on your mind about it. Do you believe that such a system would be capable of quantum interchange at the state-to-state level, sort of bypassing the need of the federal government to be involved, with maybe the exception of regulating interstate commerce?
I think that it could. I mean, the whole quantum aspect of it. I mean, states can have the same technology as the Fed, right? They're just smaller, but some of the states are really big. See, in the world of decentralized finance or DeFi, you don't have to be big to be effective, right? But I think what's going to happen is, because of the massive overreach of the federal government, right, through these, Federal Reserve and other central bank digital currencies, you're going to see a massive push towards some of these banks. If there's just a few of them, I think they're huge almost overnight. They're going to be capitalized so quickly from patriots and other people that say, man, I just want away from all of this oversight, this intrusion, this loss of privacy, the ability to cut me off from buying or selling. I want out. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, religious, non-religious. I mean, people want financial freedom. And I think that those banks would grow so rapidly that nobody will be able to understand how quickly it could possibly happen. But I think they explode to massive size almost overnight.
Just speculation here, musings, if you will, on this end, but it would seem like if we came to such a situation as this, one of the areas that state legislature could turn to fund such an adventure in the beginning would be the population of that state that had taken responsible financial steps in their lives, right? Individuals who hold tangible assets, who are able to actually help back such a venture, right? And I think such a venture would have to come with certain guarantees. There would have to be certain ownership clarifications that would need to be, I think, outlined, right? Because of the system we're coming from. We can't have a total trust-based system, I think, in our first step out of this older debt slave system, because that entire debt slave system is based on mistrust, callousness, and greed, right? So we have to go from total distrust to maybe neutral on the trust, and then we move into more of a trust and good faith system. And I think moving from the second to the third could happen relatively quickly, to be perfectly honest. We, the people out there, are primarily good individuals, right? We want to see the other party made whole. We want to see the other party ensured that their security, their stability, their ability to conduct commerce and live their lives is just as frugal and just as vibrant as ours, right? And so at the end of the day, I think it is worth noting that things like precious metals or just various assets that hold real and tangible value in general are smart things to always hold on to, right? They always sort of move through different transitions and systems. They're oftentimes collected by governments. In history, historically, they're collected for negative reasons. I think in the future, we may have an offering where you get to volunteer, but it's not collected, right? Something like if you would like to help fund a decentralized state chartered bank, for example. But again, this is just speculation and musings, and I'm not a financial advisor, but it would seem to me that the precious metals or just anything that has real value would be worthwhile throughout that process, regardless of what happens in this Bretton Woods, NATO, Western world system that has been used to essentially flog the rest of the world for the last 100 years.
Yeah, for sure. Well, 100%. The only way to actually maximize your future is to maximize each and every day. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know what today holds. So you maximize that. How do you do that? Well, silver is telling us that's how you maximize today. It's outpacing unofficial inflation. It's safe. It's got diminishing supply. Even in the slowest economy in the last 4 decades, silver is still 60% of all mining production for manufacturing. That's what the slowest economy we've seen in 40 years. Imagine how much demand for silver there would be for manufacturing if the economy were robust, but it's not, and it's not going to be there. But yet we still have over 60% of all global mining production is used for manufacturing. Sky's the limit, SG, truly. It's one of those rare things where normally if you want to maximize your return, you have to maximize your risk. If you want to minimize your risk, you'll get a minimized return. We have minimized risk and maximized return in the same sentence with silver right now, which is why it's such a huge blessing for people.
Folks, there you have it. Dr. Kirk, I really appreciate you being back on today and spending some time. In closing thoughts, I think that as we move towards a decentralized world, a system where we, the people, have more active control and total ownership and sovereignty over our ability to exchange value, we're going to have several steps along the way, right? Baby steps first, and then we crawl, then we walk. What is so beautiful, I think, about the innovativeness and ingenuity of mankind and all of you out there listening to broadcasts like this is the ability to digest possibilities and then extrapolate what you like from that, discard what you don't like, and come up with an alternate solution that may bridge a broader area. this is a really exciting time to be alive. We've been given an opportunity as mankind, with the presidency of Donald J. Trump, and then a post Donald Trump publicly, if we will, world. We've been given the opportunity as mankind to step into the ring, to put the gloves on and actually go to work, to begin fixing the system. We have to clean things out. But more than that, we have to come up with alternatives. We have to come up with things to put in their places, right? If we go into a house, for example, and we realize that the plumbing system is shot all to heck, and that the electrical system is dangerous and has to be gutted, we're not going, and if there's a family living there, we're not going to go in and gut one of those systems, for example, and have that turnover process be longer than 24 hours, right? We're going to have to go in and do it a little bit by a little bit by a little bit, unless we're planning on doing it all in one time. And with something as large as what we're talking about, I don't think one time is possible. I think we're witnessing the little bit by little bit as we go, as we look at the commerce and the differing balances happening throughout the world, right? China and Egypt and China and Russia having very serious conversations about military protection and resources, right? The exchange of fuel. And so these sorts of things, I think, are outlining a world that helps to rebalance things. We do have to go through a downturn of some sort in the US dollar-based system, because at the end of the day, the beast lives here, right? The beast, we're in the cave with the Hydra. We have to get all the tentacles out of the rest of the world and all of the heads cut off and brought back. But we have to deal with the actual animal here in the United States and in the European, that North American European based system. So, Dr. Kirk, any last closing thoughts before we cut off today?
I mean, don't be gripped and paralyzed with fear. There is a solution. Secondly, I would watch what the central banks are doing, not listen to what they say. What are they doing? They're amassing thousands or hundreds of tons of gold. Thousands to hundreds of tons, not ounces, tons, right? And over the last couple of weeks, it's been identified that they're repatriating their gold, meaning they're bringing it back to the homeland from the vaults that they have it stored in London and New York. To me, that's an ominous sign of the red flags of war are flying, right? Because they see what happened to Russia and the freezing of assets that happened when they went to Ukraine. Why would you bring all of your assets home? I think they're preparing for something. I think economic war is right around the corner. If they're doing it for safety, we should follow suit, do the same thing, which is why we are allocating so heavily into silver. That's what I'd like to leave people with. It's like, do what they're doing. They're doing it for their own protection. They're smart. They're creating the system, right? So let's beat them at their own game, A, by doing some of the same things that they're doing, investing into tangible precious metals, but B, get out of the way of their FedNow app and this digital enslavement that's coming by allocating into physical metals. To me, that's the bold, courageous move, just thinking outside of the box to beat them at their own game.
To beat them at their own game. And ladies and gentlemen, isn't that what we've been doing in this entire process? As we look at the narrative space, the information warfare space, the Trump presidency, the mean tweets, the ability to manipulate the media that President Trump so expertly showed off to us as he went through that time in office. Beating them at their own game is what this is all about. We are quite literally the inheritors of this world. We have to act like it, and we have to build out the things necessary to maintain that mantle. And so for the first time in a very long time, maybe for the first time ever, we have the ability to come together and apply strategies to do exactly that. Dr. Elliott, thank you for coming back today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is SG Anon. I'll be back with you again soon on the Q News Patriot. Thanks. Bye-bye.